The caretaker's footsteps echoed through the quiet hallway of the Paris, Texas home. Something felt wrong that August morning in 1996. The door to Mary Moore Seawright's bedroom was ajar, and inside lay a scene that would haunt this small Texas town for nearly 3 decades. Mary wasn't just another resident of Paris. At 86, she was a pillar of generosity whose name now graces one of Austin's most cherished parks. A woman who had turned down millions from developers, choosing instead to preserve her land for future generations to enjoy. But on August 18th, someone repaid her kindness with unimaginable brutality. The violence of the attack shocked even veteran investigators. As Mary fought for her life in a Dallas hospital, detectives zeroed in on a suspicious tenant with a fresh cut on his hand, a cut he desperately tried to hide. But without modern forensic tools, this crucial piece of evidence slipped through their fingers. For 28 years, her killer walked free. This is a story of how a single drop of DNA finally shattered decades of silence, of how a woman's legacy of kindness lived on even as the mystery of her death deepened, and of how justice, though delayed, finally caught up to the darkness that invaded her home on that summer morning in Texas.
But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask for a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss out on any new videos. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the case.
Mary Moore Seawright's story began in the corridors of Texas Power, where her father, W.R. Moore, served as acting Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. But it was her own quiet strength that would leave an indelible mark on Texas history. In 1939, her family's move to Austin set in motion a chain of events that would shape both her legacy and, tragically, the circumstances of her death. The following year, Mary married Dan Seawright, president of the Walter Tips Hardware Company and a prominent figure in Austin's business community. Together, they built more than just a life. They created a vision for the future. The couple's ranch became their pride and joy, a sprawling testament to Texas's natural beauty. But life had other plans. When Dan passed away in the 1950s, Mary faced a choice that would reveal her true character. Instead of selling the ranch or letting others manage it, she took the reins herself. In an era when women were often sidelined in business matters, Mary proved to be a skilled and determined leader. She managed not only the ranch, but also several rental properties in Paris, Texas, where she would later make her home. Her tenants knew her as a fair landlord, someone who valued community over profit. The real estate developers came calling in the 1980s, waving multi-million-dollar offers that would have set Mary up for life. But Mary saw something they didn't. She saw families playing under Texas oak trees, children discovering nature, and a community finding peace in open spaces. In 1988, she made a decision that would cement her legacy. She sold 88 acres to the city of Austin at a modest price and donated an additional 206 acres, ensuring that nearly 300 acres of pristine Texas land would be preserved for future generations. The park that now bears her name isn't just a patch of green on a map. It's a 344-acre testament to one woman's vision and generosity. As a founding member of the Austin chapter of the Audubon Society, Mary understood the delicate balance between progress and preservation. She chose the latter, even when it meant saying no to fortune. By 1996, Mary had settled into a quieter life in Paris, Texas. At 86, she still maintained her rental properties, keeping detailed records and maintaining personal relationships with her tenants. She was known for her sharp mind, her kind heart, and her unwavering dedication to doing what she thought was right. Her home on a quiet street in Paris seemed a fitting place to reflect on a life well lived. But someone in her trusted circle harbored darkness. Someone saw not a philanthropist, not a visionary, not a beloved community member, but a vulnerable target. And in August of 1996, that someone would shatter the peace Mary had spent a lifetime building. August 18th, 1996, dawned like any other summer Sunday in Paris, Texas. The morning silence on Mary's street was broken only by the arrival of her caretaker, making their routine check-in. But what they discovered that morning was anything but routine. Inside the modest home where Mary had lived independently, despite her 86 years, lay a scene of unthinkable violence. Mary had been brutally attacked in her own bedroom. The assailant had sexually assaulted her, beaten her severely, and attempted to strangle her. The caretaker's discovery of Mary, barely clinging to life, set off a desperate race against time. Emergency responders, recognizing the severity of her injuries, immediately called for an airlift to Dallas's Advanced Trauma Center. For 3 agonizing days, Mary fought for her life in that Dallas hospital. The community of Paris held its collective breath, praying for the woman who had given so much to others. But on August 21st, Mary Moore Seite succumbed to her injuries. The assault that began as an attempted murder had become a homicide, and Paris, Texas had lost one of its most respected residents. The investigation began immediately. Detectives focused first on Mary's immediate circle, knowing that many violent crimes against elderly victims often involve someone they know. As they dug deeper, they discovered that Mary owned and rented out several properties in Paris, including some on the same street where she lived. This opened up a new avenue of inquiry. Her tenants. One tenant in particular caught the investigators' attention. David Paul Cady Jr., 25 years old at the time, lived in one of Mary's nearby properties. During initial interviews, detectives noticed something odd about his behavior. Cady seemed nervous, unusually so, and appeared to be hiding his hand. When questioned about it, he revealed a fresh cut, but his story about how he got it kept changing. The inconsistencies in Cady's explanations raised red flags. First, he claimed he'd cut himself at work. Then the story shifted. It was a household accident. Each version seemed more implausible than the last. Investigators, their suspicions growing, took DNA swabs from Cady's hand. It was standard procedure, but in 1996, DNA testing was still in its relative infancy. The samples were collected, logged into evidence, and sent to the lab. But then, like so many promising leads in difficult cases, the trail began to cool. The DNA testing available at the time couldn't provide the conclusive evidence needed for an arrest. Cady remained a person of interest, but without hard evidence linking him to the crime, investigators couldn't move forward with charges. As weeks turned into months, the case that had shocked Paris began to slip from the headlines. Mary's family was left with not only the grief of losing her, but the added pain of knowing her killer walked free. The brutality of the crime, combined with Mary's age and sterling reputation in the community, made the lack of resolution even more difficult to bear. For the investigators, who had worked the case tirelessly, Mary's file would become one that haunted them. A reminder of justice delayed, of questions unanswered, of a killer who had slipped through their grasp. The years following Mary's murder settled over Paris, Texas like a heavy fog. Each passing month seemed to push the possibility of justice further away. The DNA samples from Cady's hand sat in evidence storage, a silent witness to a crime that technology wasn't yet advanced enough to solve. In the 1990s, DNA testing required larger samples and couldn't detect the minute traces that modern methods can reveal. What might have been damning evidence in 2024 was frustratingly inconclusive in 1996. For the detectives who had worked the case, Mary's file became a constant reminder of their limitations. They had a suspicious tenant with an injured hand and changing stories. They had DNA samples that might hold the key to the case. What they didn't have was the scientific capability to connect these dots definitively. Lead after lead went cold. Witnesses' memories began to fade. The trail that had once seemed so promising slowly disappeared into the past. Meanwhile, in Austin, construction began on the park that would bear Mary's name. As families started to enjoy the trails and open spaces she had fought to preserve, few knew the tragic story of the woman behind the park's creation. The Mary Moore Seite Metropolitan Park became a living testament to her generosity, even as the mystery of her death remained unsolved. Children played beneath the same Texas oak trees she had worked so hard to protect, unaware of the dark shadow that hung over her legacy. Back in Paris, the community's fear gradually gave way to a resigned sadness. The knowledge that someone capable of such violence might still be walking among them never fully faded. For her family, the lack of closure was a wound that refused to heal. Each anniversary of her death brought renewed pain and unanswered questions. Who could have committed such a heinous act against a woman who had given so much to others? The question echoed through the years, seemingly destined to remain one of Texas's unsolved mysteries. But even as the case grew colder, forensic science was evolving. New techniques were being developed, new possibilities emerging. Though no one knew it at the time, the evidence carefully preserved from that August morning in 1996 was waiting for technology to catch up with justice. In 2021, 25 years after Mary's murder, a new chapter in her story began. The Texas Rangers, reviewing cold cases that might benefit from modern forensic analysis, pulled her file from the archives. The case qualified for the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, a Department of Justice program designed to breathe new life into long-dormant investigations. Finally, the evidence collected on that tragic day in 1996 would meet the full power of modern forensic science. The technological advances in DNA analysis over those 25 years had been staggering. What was once impossible had become routine. Tests could now detect and analyze microscopic traces of DNA that would have been invisible to forensic teams in the 90s. And somewhere in an evidence locker, those swabs from David Paul Katie Jr.'s suspicious hand injury had waited patiently for science to catch up. When investigators reopened the evidence boxes, they found everything meticulously preserved, a testament to the original investigators who had hoped this day would come. The DNA samples, collected when Bill Clinton was still president and the internet was in its infancy, were about to tell their story using technology that would have seemed like science fiction in 1996. The breakthrough came in 2023. As forensic scientists analyzed the decades-old swabs from Katie's hand, they found what their predecessors couldn't. Mary's DNA was present on the hand he had tried so desperately to hide during questioning, the same hand he had given multiple conflicting explanations for injuring. The evidence that had been there all along was finally visible through the lens of modern science. For investigators, the discovery was electrifying. The suspicions of detectives from 1996 had been right. Katie hadn't just been acting suspicious, he had quite literally been caught red-handed. The DNA evidence provided the missing link they had sought for nearly 3 decades. In February 2024, law enforcement moved to make the arrest, only to discover that Katie was already behind bars in Hopkins County Jail for an unrelated crime. At 54 years old, the former tenant, who had once tried to hide a cut on his hand, was finally charged with Mary's murder. The case that had haunted Paris, Texas for 28 years was about to reach its conclusion. By December 2024, a Lamar County grand jury had heard the evidence, the suspicious behavior, the changing stories, and most importantly, the DNA proof that modern science had finally revealed. Their response was decisive. David Paul Katie Jr. was indicted for the murder of Mary Moore Seite. The indictment represented more than just the wheels of justice turning. It was validation for every detective who had worked the case, every family member who had kept Mary's memory alive, and every community member who had hoped this day would come. Technology had finally caught up with truth, proving that even decades-old evidence could tell its story if preserved long enough for science to unlock its secrets. The arrest of David Paul Katie Jr. sent shockwaves through both Paris and Austin. For those who had known Mary, the revelation that her killer had been hiding in plain sight all these years was almost too much to bear. Former neighbors recalled how Katie had attended community gatherings, had been seen walking the same streets where Mary had once greeted passersby with a warm smile. He had lived among them, carrying this dark secret for nearly 3 decades. Details emerged that painted a disturbing picture of the events leading up to that August morning. Investigators revealed that Katie had been behind on his rent, and Mary, true to her generous nature, had been working with him to resolve the situation. The same compassion that had led her to preserve hundreds of acres for future generations may have unknowingly put her in harm's way. She had seen someone in need of understanding. He had seen vulnerability to exploit. The Texas Rangers who worked to solve the case spoke about the unique challenges they faced. The DNA evidence, while preserved, had degraded over time. It took multiple attempts with the latest technology to finally extract usable samples. Each failed attempt had brought fresh waves of anxiety. What if the evidence had deteriorated too much? What if justice remained eternally out of reach? The successful match, when it finally came, had brought tears to the eyes of hardened investigators. Local media coverage revealed another layer to the story. Other tenants from that time period came forward sharing stories of Mary's kindness, how she had worked with families struggling to make ends meet, how she had sometimes accepted late payments without adding fees, how she had believed in giving people second chances. Each story made the betrayal of her trust feel even more profound. The case also sparked renewed interest in cold case investigations across Texas. Other families with unsolved cases began reaching out to law enforcement, hoping that advances in forensic science might bring them the same closure that Mary's case had finally received. Her story became a beacon of hope for those still waiting for answers. Today, the Mary Morse Seite Metropolitan Park stands as more than just a memorial to its namesake. It's a testament to the power of perseverance, both in Mary's vision for preserving natural spaces and in the relentless pursuit of justice that finally brought her killer to account. Families still gather beneath the Texas oak trees she saved. Children still play along the trails she protected. And nature still thrives on the land she refused to sell. Perhaps the most powerful tribute to Mary's legacy isn't the park that bears her name, or even the long-awaited justice in her case. It's the reminder that acts of generosity can outlive tragedy. While her life was cut short by violence, her gift to future generations continues to touch lives every day. The darkness of one August morning couldn't overshadow the light she brought to her community. Yet as we close this final chapter of Mary's story, we're left with disturbing questions about the shadow that walked alongside her generosity. Here was a woman who opened her doors to others, who trusted her tenants, who believed in the good of her community. And one of those very people betrayed that trust in the most horrific way imaginable. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability in our communities. How does someone who witnessed such kindness turn to such violence? What drives a person to destroy not just a life, but the very bonds of trust that hold small communities together? And while modern science finally brought justice for Mary, we have to wonder how many other cold cases are sitting in evidence lockers across the country, waiting for technology to catch up with truth. How many other families are still waiting for answers? Share your thoughts below on what you think drove someone to betray such profound trust and generosity. And if you want to explore more cases where justice refused to stay buried, join our true crime community by hitting subscribe. Because as Mary's case proves, no case is truly cold as long as someone remembers.